if you're not a listener to the ComicLab podcast, this is a great time to start. We've got some really good episodes coming up. One of which I think just posted yesterday. I think the Whose House Are You In episode posted yesterday. And that's a rant that I basically kind of trotted out, practiced, and perfected on this live stream. And it's getting really great response. And that is how I talked about if you're wondering what social media is acceptable, what kind of promotion is not so acceptable, and it keeps you from promoting on social media because you don't know you feel like you're spamming or you feel like you're being inappropriate. The Whose House Are You In metaphor really, really grabbed a lot of our listeners. So not only is it a great time to listen to the Comic Lab podcast coming up, but it's also great to listen to it in the next few episodes. We've got a wonderful interview with Greg Evans and Karen Evans as they're going to be celebrating the 40th anniversary of syndicated comic strip Luann. And right after that, we're going to have the 400th episode of Comic Lab podcast, which is amazing to think that it's been 400 episodes already. Technically 800 with the second podcast we record every week called Pro Tips. Technically, that's 800 podcasts that we've got under our belt. And we've got some fun stuff planned for that. If you'd like to participate, go over to patreon.com/comiclab. It's a public post that we've made there that talks about how you can call in and leave a voicemail of one of your favorite Comic Lab moments. And you'll see we give you the instructions on how to do that. It's basically a Google phone that's hooked up to a voicemail. And we're going to be listening to those and talking about them. And we're going to try to structure the entire show around your calls. So please, if you've got a few minutes, because this is a great idea that I have a little bit too late. So we're going to be recording that episode very, very soon. So if you'd like to participate, don't put it off. And go over to patreon.com/comiclab and find out how you can participate. George is participating from Scotland over there. Welcome once again, George. I was reading on Substack about your what would that be called? Circumnavigating Scotland. It sounds like you went around the entire perimeter. Sounds like you were a busy cartoonist over there in Scotland. And I hope you're sitting back and relaxing with the live stream. So lots of things we can talk about. And again, like I said, I kind of like using this live stream to try out topics that I'd like to bring on the show and discuss with my co-host, Dave Kellett. And also just to kind of review and get another shot at discussing some things that I've already talked about on the podcast. But one of the reasons I do this live stream is I'm able to chop these up and put them out on TikTok and YouTube Shorts, where they're getting some pretty decent traction, and I can reach a few more people that way too, which feels really good. Because some of these things I really feel quite strongly about. If you've listened to the podcast or watched any of my previous live streams, you probably figured out that I'm not a person that feels 50-50 about a whole lot of things. I'm kind of all gas and no brakes when it comes to comics, and that just is what it is. But if you don't have any questions to pitch, I've got something that I've been really, as we're approaching our 400th episode of Comic Lab, what happens is it's kind of like you get into a long conversation with a lot of other cartoonists at all kinds of different levels, and interesting things happen. When you hear people respond to you, you realize that maybe you didn't do a good job of explaining certain things. I think I've had one of those moments earlier this week, or you find out that what they're hearing is almost intentionally sideways, and you've got to take them and redirect that a little bit. here's one of those examples. I've always said that social media rewards consistency, not creativity. And that's something that I find to be very, very true. You can easily prove it to yourself. Social media doesn't reward creativity, it rewards consistency. Okay. And when I share that thought on social media, an awful lot, I hear back from creative people who are like, yeah, you're right. That's absolutely right. And it's very clear as they keep talking that it's an excuse for their not getting traction on social media in their brains, right? It's like, yeah, that's why I'm not doing well. It's because I'm creative and social media isn't rewarding me. It's rewarding all these other people who can be consistent. And that's a really good example of where I need to take somebody and kind of redirect that energy a little bit. Because you've got the basic point, but you're missing the much bigger point, and that's this. If you're a creative person on social media, you've got an unfair advantage over everybody else because creativity is very engaging on social media. It is very useful. And when you pair that with consistency, you're going to really find that your stuff gets hard. If you're just relying on creativity, it is the other way of thinking about this. If you're just relying on creativity, you're not doing as well because you need that consistency aspect as well. And that's where, again, I'm going to go back to that whose house are you in metaphor. You are on your social media feed, your place on the platform. You cannot spam people very easily. I'm sure people have tried, but if you are speaking to your base, as long as you're providing a good mix of topics, as long as you're not all commercial all the time, you're mixing in all of the four C's of social media, including curation, where you're sharing other people's work, the one thing none of us do very well because it ain't me, me, me. If you're doing all the four C's of social media, you can or get a very consistent outlook on social media and get a lot of traction paired with your creativity, your ability to say clever things, to post clever things, to make a comic that somebody wants to read. That's an unfair advantage. So when I say that social media doesn't reward creativity, it rewards consistency. That's not an excuse for you to say, well, no wonder I'm playing a rigged game. What that is, it's an indication to you that you should pair your creativity with consistency. And you are going, I can practically guarantee you're going to see better results when you include that consistency. So what does consistency mean? Well, it means that number one, you get a lot of us who are cartoonists, we post one comic and then you never see that comic again. It's just, it disappears, right? And think back over your archive. How many times have you posted a comic just one time, right? And you know, based on most social media algorithms, and I'll be the first to give Blue Sky props that they're much less algorithm driven than most, but even Blue Sky, even if you take and throttle an algorithm way, way back to its basics, there's still a low probability that the person following you actually saw that comic that you posted. If you only posted it one time, you're really not giving yourself the best benefit. Now, I see people kind of taking this and they do it in a hand-handed way. They'll post it in the morning and then they'll say, here's the post, here's a retweet for the night crowd, or here's a repost for the night people. And I don't think that's very compelling. I don't think that's a very compelling way to swig. In other words, say why it's good. That's our byline when we're posting on social media is if you don't know what to say why it's good. And here's a retweet for the night crowd does not swig. Right? It's pretty lame, as a matter of fact. So that doesn't mean necessarily that, but in my opinion, you can take that that comic that you posted on Tuesday, not Tuesday night necessarily, but maybe next Thursday, and then repackaged in a way. In other words, reformatted or posted under a different guise. Here's a different reason I wanted to share this with you, right? There's a lot of different ways to post the same content. One that I'm having a lot of luck with is This Date in Evil Ink History. Evil Ink is my comic. I started doing it back in 2005. I can plug in almost any date and come up with at least 2 or 3 comics that I had posted during that time on that date, like July 14th, right? I can bring up a whole bunch of stuff that happened to land on July 14th, 2002, July 14th, 2012. You get the idea. And I use that as an example of posting older work. I don't say here's a rerun. I don't say here's a golden oldie. I don't make excuses for posting old work, but that's one of the ways that I can get a little bit more consistency in my social media. Also, as much as I hate to admit it, and this is about the third time that I've done this throughout my career, since Blue Sky is really, really reactive right now. I've seen a lot of good things coming out of Blue Sky, and I really do believe that this is the time to be audience building on Blue Sky. I bought I think it's $5 a month. Later.com is a scheduler. And again, it's not the first time I've used a scheduler, and I had stopped on each one of them in the past because I started to see some evidence that, like for example, the Twitter algorithm was throttling things that weren't posted in its own environment. Same thing for Instagram. Nobody's able to actually prove that stuff, but I started to see enough evidence that made me think, yeah, what am I doing here? Also, because of the way those algorithms on those other platforms performed, I could literally see I wasn't getting anywhere. So I stopped using them. Later.com, I've started up with again, mainly because out of all the ones, and I was going to go back to Hootsuite. I was going to go back to, well, I forget what the other one was. But they weren't set up to do Blue Sky as well as Later was. So I am now usually on a Saturday afternoon while or a Saturday morning. I usually get up before the rest of the family gets up, brew the coffee, and sit out on our front porch, take the laptop with me, and I will literally plan a week's worth of social media posts on a Saturday morning to the tune of between 60 and 80 posts a week. Okay. That's how I am getting consistency in my numbers, how I'm getting engagement on Blue Sky, how I'm picking up new followers. And it isn't only comics. Remember, the biggest mistake that we cartoonists can make is to think that people just want comics out of us. I'm talking about comics topics on Blue Sky. I'm sharing some thoughts of my own. Again, you have to decide where your line is that you will and will not share personal information, and each one of those lines is valid. But there's lots of things. I almost have come to look at my Blue Sky as if I'm the owner of my own television station or cable channel or streaming service. And I have certain programming that goes into certain time slots, right? Between, and by the way, I realize that I'm in the Eastern time zone and some of my readers might be in the Western. There's no perfect way to do this. And of course, I've got some very kind readers who are over there in Europe, one of whom is joining us right now. Marguerite is here. And I know that my time zones and hers don't line up, but it's a way that I can organize my thoughts and try to get as much bang for my buck as I can get. But typically, I will do after dark promotion in the early morning hours, right? 1 o'clock a.m. through 3 o'clock a.m. I usually post a morning-based message in the 8 o'clock a.m. zone. Yeah, 2018, a lovely evening. Yeah, no kidding. I hope you're enjoying it. Uh, but I will literally put in stripes of programming, some of which is just there to help me to organize things. Okay. And I will be the first to admit I've got a little bit of a advantage over some folks that might not have been doing this for long, because not only am I promoting and talking about my comics, but I'm also promoting and talking about my podcast, Comic Lab, the new show we're doing on YouTube called Wrong Way Show, my book, the Webcomics Handbook, the stuff I'm doing on here on Substack for the Webcomics Handbook. I've got a lot of stuff to talk about, so it helps me also organize those. But it might help you as you are trying to increase your your consistency, to either get a scheduler like later.com, who, by the way, they don't give me any money for saying that. I just think they've got pretty good service. Uh, but if you can start scheduling things out, and then the benefit of using a scheduler is that you're not sitting there trying to think of things on the fly. In other words, I've got a Google Doc that has my social media strategy written right out. In other words, it says in the mornings, you post this kind of stuff. In the afternoons, you post these topics. In the evening, you post these topics. And one of the ways that that has really paid off for me is it reminds me all of the different things that I can be talking about when I'm not directly talking comics. For example, before I used a scheduler, I would often forget that I had entire revenue streams that needed to be reminded and talked about, right? Whether it's the stuff I'm doing on Itch.io, whether it's these Patreon collections, both of the Patreons I'm involved in, Comic Lab and my own. Those Patreon collections are really good for bringing in a little extra money and for repackaging content and making it available to people who are not Patreon backers at the moment. Plus, for the people who are Patreon backers, it's a great little value add to their subscription, because you package that stuff right up for them. It makes it very attractive for them to continue their membership. But if I'm just doing it off the top of my head, again, I'll give you a great example. You may not have noticed, but last week, especially, you wouldn't notice if you're a Patreon backer or a subscriber on Substack. I was gone all last week. I was up in Michigan visiting my family, up in Ohio visiting my family, running around after nieces and nephews, playing backyard wiffle ball, front yard cornhole, multiple games of euchre, scopa, aggravation, you name it. We were nonstop. My heart was my heart was full. My back was wrecked. But you didn't necessarily notice it, because all of my posts fired off just the way they always do. My morning posts went off as planned. All my promotion went off as planned. I was putting those messages out. Hey, I got a book on Amazon. You know about this Patreon collection that just talks about the art of lettering for Comic Lab podcast listeners. All of those things went fired right off as usual, and there was no interruption in what I was offering, not only on social media, but I was doing the same thing on Patreon and Substack. I had all my content ready to go, and therefore ready to be talked about through these scheduled social media posts. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to do that, and I really do think that this is the time to be building audience on Blue Sky. I just do. I see way too much evidence to kind of ho hum and shrug and go back to the way I was doing things before. This is the time to do it. I think a scheduler is a really, really good idea on your part, to start getting that consistency into your social media approach. The creativity is going to come very natural to you, right? It's going to be your comic. It's going to be just, creative, clever tweets or posts that you're making on social media, because you're a clever person. So it's going to occur to you to say clever things, right? It's just part of who you are. those things are going to be in your wheelhouse. The thing, if you're like most of us, the thing that you're lacking is consistency. And I think a scheduler is a big, I know for me, it's been a big help. It's also helped, again, for me to organize my thoughts. One thing that has been very helpful is that I would get into the situation where I would say, well, listen, I already told them I got a book available on Amazon. I told them that last Tuesday. There's nothing more to say. And of course, that's a thing that a dummy would say, right? That's a dummy thing to say, because how many people didn't hear that? You got to get used to repeating yourself to a certain extent and doing it gracefully, not ham-handed. Spreading them out, making sure that you're not getting redundant. Although it's hard, it is possible, right? I've got to make sure that at least once a week, somewhere at different times during the week, different times during the day, I got to say, oh, by the way, did you see my book on Amazon? Fantastic book. You need to buy it. Same thing with the digital download. Same thing with something that I just realized this far in. I have not been doing a good job of telling people that if they get an annual subscription to my Patreon at the $12 level, they get a 10% discount that basically amounts to them getting 1 month free, right? And I was going over reviewing what I was doing on social media, which you should be doing as well. And I'm like, you know what? I never seem to mention that. And it seems like it's a really important thing to mention to people that if they get that annual subscription, they get a month free and you get a really nice boost to your monthly Patreon because you get that entire sum of money in that first month. Okay. This is something that I realized I needed to beef up about my own outreach. So if you follow me on social media, you're going to start hearing those outreach messages more often. You're going to hear 10% off and 1 month free. You're going to hear those two things over and over and over again. Remember, marketing rules of thumb tell us that a person needs to hear something about 7 times before they act on it. All the more reason for you to be focusing on consistency, right? And I think there's a lot of benefit to keeping the same messaging. You can change up the wording, but there's certain key points about that messaging that you need to make redundant, right? In other words, I'm going to say it 100 different ways, but 10% off is always going to be part of that messaging, and 1 month free is always going to be part of that messaging. Okay. This is something that I think you could get a lot of use out of. Just a simple scheduler. Like I said, later costs me about $5 a month. It is not a difficult expenditure to make, and it's been paying off in real good dividends, especially because I can take a look at my entire week at a glance, see all these strata of content that I've got there, see it, and then I can see holes, and I can see, oh, I need it, and I've got the other thing that later does that's really useful is that I can make I can keep a repository of posts. So I've got a whole repository of ComicLab posts where I'm promoting the show, promoting the Patreon, promoting this collection, promoting that collection. All I've got to do is drag that into place and it's scheduled and ready to go. Okay. So as you might imagine, I've got a whole row of Evil Ink After Dark posts ready to go. A whole row of Evil Ink posts ready to go. A whole row of Evil Ink merchandise posts ready to go. And there are anywhere from a half dozen to 2 dozen posts in each one of those rows. So when I see that I've got holes, boom, I'm filling them in. I got certain strata of the day where I kind of reserved for reminding people of some of the stuff that I'm doing monetarily. It's going to fill those in. In other words, I'm not going to have to think about that over and over and over again. I'm just going to plug those holes with things that I thought about once, and I'm just going to put it right back in there. Creative? No. Consistent? Yes. And that's where we have to have the creativity consistency conversation, uh, and understand fully what it means. In other words, when I say that creativity is not rewarded, but consistency is, that's not for you to say, "Oh, I know," and then, poor me, I'm too creative. No, no, it means that you've got to say, "Hey, that's right. Time for me to get more consistent." Right? This is something that you could absolutely use for yourself. JC is saying this is something where visual aids would help. It's a great idea. I will prepare a post for the Webcomics Handbook on Substack, which you can subscribe to here. And I can show you exactly what I've got laid out for any given week. So if you are a subscriber, you can see it there. Obviously, it's kind of hard for me to do that here in a graceful way, but I can absolutely do that where you can, if you want it, you can just go over it with a fine tooth comb and say, oh yeah, this is what this knucklehead's up to. So yeah, look for that in the coming weeks on the Webcomics Handbook on Substack. If you're not subscribed already, shame on you, but I think you can just tap my name at the top there and subscribe very, very quickly. It's a great way for you to keep in touch with some of the stuff that we're doing now. It's a great idea, JC. Thanks for bringing that up. Genuine question. How do you feel about cameos in your comics? Uh, 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 let me ask you a clarifying question. Me putting a cameo into my comic or seeing my characters or my face in someone else's comic? Because I think I've got two different answers for that. So which way are we going with that? And then we'll talk about that. And then if there's no other topics, we can always talk about one that I'm really passionate about, and it's accepting criticism. We'll talk about that coming up. The first, but let's do both. Uh, so I I tend to not do. I used to do it a lot more. Since I've gotten a little bit more serious, I do it a lot less. And I don't allow it to become a big part of my storytelling. In other words, it would be nothing for me to put Batman or Spider-Man into one of my comics. I don't do that anymore just because I'm not seriously worried about getting a cease and desist. More to the point, I don't want to rely on those exterior things that I have no control over, and the effect that they might, in any number of ways, foreseen and unforeseen, impact my business. So I don't do a lot of cameos in my comic. Uh, even to the extent, like the only comics cameo that I have done in my comic in recent years has been from my podcast partner Dave Kellett. I've name dropped either his comics, or I drew a gargoyle that was very clearly based on his art style for kind of an inside joke. Then I'll do something like that, but not crazy about it. And JC says I was way too vague. Cameos of characters of other creators, either one way or both ways. Oh, that's an easy one. I would. That's an easy one. I'm not a good enough caricature artist to do, like, if I wanted to put Dave Kellett himself into my comic and have him standing in the background. I know my strengths and weaknesses as an artist, and I wouldn't be able to do that so people would be able to say, "Oh, that's Dave Kellett," or that's JC Knight, or that's this person or that person. So I tend not to do that a whole lot. I've been cameoed in other people's comics. I think it's perfectly great. It strokes my ego. I don't know if any. I don't feel as if they've made a good choice, because I don't think I've got the kind of notoriety that people are going to take a look at that image and say, "Oh, hey, that's Brad Geiger." But it certainly does play to my ego that somebody's interested in doing that. But no, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to Cameo material, whether it's another character or creator or any of that kind of stuff, I really tend to want to keep all of my intellectual property, at least for the comic. Now, doing certain things like a Patreon commission or certain things that are just going to appear on social media, those I can see. I can see lots of opportunities there, but for the main comic, not so much. Let's talk about criticism. There's lots of places that we receive criticism. We're expected to take criticism, and I accept none of it. All right, and you don't have to either. So let's talk about criticism. First of all, criticism from a reader. The ComicLab byword on that is never listen to a reader, always listen to your readers. Okay? And it's the plural there. That's very important. Okay? You cannot listen to one reader. That's a great way to chase your tail, is to let one reader say, well, I don't think you should do XYZ, or you should do ABC. Because what the trap that we fall into is we think that that one reader represents a whole strata of readers, and they might, but that strata might be large, that strata might be small, and if you are making creative decisions or even some business decisions based on that one reader, you're going to let yourself get way distracted from what's real in front of you, and you're going to end up making really bad decisions. Okay, so reader criticism, it's something you've got to handle very, very gingerly, in my experience. Okay, and by the way, I will tell you that we were just talking about strata earlier, different stratas of information. I have different strata when it comes to listening to criticism. In other words, if I get a comment on a social media post, like a comment there, I pay zero attention to that. It is less than not important to me. Okay. Especially if I don't recognize the name, like I haven't had a number of interactions with that person. Case in point here, I see people posting in the chat down here. Some of these names I know I've read before, right? Some of these names I know I've talked to before. If Don says, Brad, I think you're really screwed up on this, that, and the next, I might give Don a little bit more sway than I would just some rando, right? Because I know Don's been invested in what I do in comics for a number of years. And so, of course, I'm going to give that a little bit more attention. He might not convince me to go one way or the other, but I'm going to listen. A rando I've never heard of on the internet? No, I don't pay any attention to that. Now, Patreon backer, now you got my attention. A Patreon backer, a subscriber, if you are monetarily contributing to my business, now I've got to pay attention a little bit more. Not 100% yet, but I got to pay attention a little bit more than I would have on social media. And of course, if I start to pick up notes of that criticism in 2 or 3 or 4 different places, now I'm really paying attention. Okay, but in general, you never pay attention to a reader. You always pay attention to your readers. And by the way, just to put a little asterisk in there, if that reader is a Patreon backer, yeah, no kidding, you're paying a lot more attention. And then Teddy comes in and he says, I'm going to give you the perfect transition into the next part of your talk, Geiger. All you got to do is read this and go to the races. Because Teddy says, what about interviewers who critique your comic? I've had a few critics who picked my comic book and chewed me up and spit me out. Here's the problem with that, Teddy. And I'm sorry if you're a critic, because my opinion on critics is this. If you knew shit about how to do comics, you'd be doing a comic, not talking about me doing a comic. I don't accept Any of these people that set themselves up as critics on websites, blogs, YouTube, podcasts, I don't accept any of it. If they knew so much about comics, they'd be doing a comic. And by the way, this all wraps into the overall thing. If a fellow cartoonist talks to me, and if I respect their work, not always, but if I do, now we're having a conversation. If I respect your work and you've got something to say to me, uh, or better yet, I've asked your thoughts and you've agreed to share them. Now I'm paying 100% attention. But some person that is sets themselves up as a critic, no, I don't accept that. And part of it is my age because and I'm sorry to old man out on you here, but there was a time when critics had to have credentials. Robert Ebert, right, had credentials as a film critic, right? Siskel and Ebert, Gene Siskel, same deal. All right. Uh, they were people who had come up and had been writing about the art and the craft of cinematography. They know what they were talking about. Okay, you don't have to have that anymore today. And I'm sorry again. I know I sound like an old man, but now anybody can just put a blog up and start posting criticisms and they can call themselves a critic. And the problem is, yes, you can do that. No, I don't have to accept it. I don't have to listen to it. In fact, not for nothing, you shouldn't listen to it. You really shouldn't. You should take it with a grain of salt. Take a look at it and say, okay, is this person making any valid comments? And if there's something you can take from that, that's fine. But you should not take it as this person has passed judgment on your work. Again, that falls under the one reader, many readers principle, doesn't it? I'd never listened to a reader, always listen to a readers. This critic is just one reader. And they might not even be somebody who has read your work consistently. This comic, Teddy, that they picked up might have been the first time they'd ever read your work. Well, okay. Again, grain of salt. If there's something there you can take, here's what I would and here's what I would do, Teddy. In your situation, I would take that, read it through, print it out or bookmark it, but read it through. Same approach I've got for writing, by the way. Let it sit for a week or so. Let it sit for a couple of weeks, and then come back when you're not emotional about it. Because if you're like me, you got emotional when you read that first one. Come back and read it through with a little bit cooler head. And is there something there that I can take? Maybe they got a point. Maybe there's something there that I can use. But just because they're a critic, you're going to change what you're doing? No, that's a terrible way to make creative decisions. You know what a camel is, don't you? That's a horse that was designed by committee. You don't want your comic to be a camel. You want your comic to be a wonderful thoroughbred horse. Okay? You don't want this thing to be designed by committee. Well, this critic says you should do that, and that critic says you could do that. And that's all crap. That's all crap. By the way, all of you folks that are in my inbox every week because you want to come on the ComicLab podcast because you think that we're going to promote your show. That's also something that I don't know that I would be that fired up to do. And especially if you've never heard our show and you don't realize that we talk business on our show and we're going to ask you about how you set your Kickstarter up and whether you did this thing right or that thing right. In the same way that I really suggest people don't try to, and by the way, we're not going to say yes anyway, so don't waste the email. Because all you got to do is listen to the show for 5 minutes, and you can see we don't do that kind of show that you're thinking about. But if you're trying to promote your stuff, and I see this happen all the time. Comic book artist says, "Hey, is there anybody doing critiques or reviews? Anybody doing reviews of comics? Would like to review my comic because you think that's good promotion? Holy crap! In my opinion, that's a terrible idea." You know why? You don't have any control over that. What that person's going to say. How is that good promotion? You're going to review my comic? No, no, the bullshit. Promotion. I want to control what comes out of promotion. I, I I see it all the time. Hey, is there anybody doing comic book reviews would like to review my comic? They think it's promotion. Holy crap, that's a terrible idea. Promotion, branding, that's something that you've got to very carefully control the messaging on, or you'll screw up everything that you've tried to build. Okay. So no, I'd be very cautious about offering your stuff up for reviews or criticisms because you think that it'll get some eyeballs on it. Also, I don't believe that there's a significant amount of people that read these review sites looking for something to buy. I just don't. I think you get a whole lot more bang for your buck out of the process of a Kickstarter. Number one, you're going to get more discoverability. And I think you get more bang for your buck doing smart social media, the thing that we talked about in the first half of the live stream. I think that gives you a whole lot more for your effort than some of these other things. But no, Teddy, you don't need to listen to critics. And again, remember what old Uncle Brad says, if these guys knew what they were doing, they'd be out there doing comics instead of trying to, pick apart what people like you and me do. That's bullshit. And I know I've done that rant before, and I make a lot of bloggers mad when I say that. But I'm sorry, you got to deal with it. You got to deal until you show. Listen, anybody who wants to critique me, first they got to show me a 25-year career. They've got to show me a stack of books. They've got to show me a healthy Patreon. They've got to show me a very healthy reader base. They got to show me that they've done what I've done. Then we can have a conversation among peers. Otherwise, we're not peers. And you have no idea what it takes for me to do what I do. So you can't we're not, you can criticize me all you want, but most of you already know I'm deaf on this side. When that kind of stuff comes in, I get deaf on this side too. Erie says, I was very sensitive to criticism years ago. The trick I found is a little bit of detachment. I don't tie my self-worth to my work. That's really healthy. I'll let you know if I ever get to where you are, Erie. I tie a lot of mine into it, and it's not healthy. So I'm going to try to get to where you are mentally. I think that's a healthy place to be. I think that's a very healthy place to be. Well, speaking of healthy places to be, in about 10 minutes, this place is going to become a much more healthier place because I'm going to turn the air conditioner off or turn it on, and I'm going to sit over there and cool down and work on the rest of the page that I started working on this morning. But by the way, we do have 10 minutes. So if you've got one more question you're burning to hear us talk about, throw it there in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out with me on another wonderful Friday afternoon. Now that we're on the other side of family vacations and holidays, we may be looking at doing this on a every Friday basis again. And again, if you'd like a consultation, go over to bradgeiger.substack.com. You can see how to sign up for a consultation. If you'd rather check out my book, The Webcomics Handbook, it is always available on Amazon.com. At some point, we may even be getting a second edition, but I still got to get it all together for that. San Diego, third year. And JC, good to see you. Thanks for coming around. I went to San Diego every year for many years, and I jumped off the treadmill several years ago. I finally decided in 2017 that I was looking at my I meant this year. Oh, okay. Yeah. Same conversation. I started looking at my revenue while I was doing my taxes. And I looked at my comic convention revenue, and I realized that I was spending way more than I was making. And I didn't realize it until I did my yearly totals, because on one convention I'd do great and make a profit, and then the next convention I'd take a loss. And then the next convention, I'd take a little profit, and the next convention, I'd take a big loss. And and of course, you know this, Teddy, because I know you go to comic conventions. We all tell ourselves all kinds of lies. We all lie to each other on the convention floor. We all say, well, we say stuff like this. Well, I'm not doing very good this weekend, but I got a bad placement on the show floor this year. And so this year's not going to be good. But next year, I'm going to get a better, I'm hoping to get a better placement. This year they put me by the men's room. The all-time greatest story about that is Wizard World Philadelphia, where they put me across from Playboy Playmates. And my closest friends went up and down the aisle all weekend long, never knew I was at the show because their head was always turned in the other direction. So you tell yourself, well, this year just isn't good. The one year I just bombed out at another Wizard World, they had all of the living Star Trek captains available for a photo shoot. And that photo shoot took a VIP pass. I was thinking upwards of about $500 or so, plus what it cost them to buy the show tickets and hotel. By the time my readers got around to me, and I'd see them with this VIP pass hanging around their neck, and they'd say, I don't have money for a book. I spent $500 on a photograph. So I was doing my taxes around 2016, 2017. I realized comic conventions are not working out for you. And all that time you're spending traveling to it and being gone and then traveling back, you're falling behind on the things that are generating income for you, Patreon, Kickstarter, your website. And I said, this is no good. You've got to wise up, or else you're going to be back to having a day job, Geiger. And so I stopped doing comic conventions in 2017. And that was the first year my business made its first significant profit. Okay. I made my first significant profit the year I stopped doing comic conventions. And that's significant. And I had to take a real hard look at that because I liked going to comic conventions. There was a lot of parts of it that I enjoyed. It's Theo or Teddy, I met you at a comic convention. I know exactly who you are. That part of it is cool. I like that, right? But I had to make a hard business decision. And I had to take a look at all those things that I was telling myself and that we tell each other as exhibitors. That was bupkis, right? That was all bupkis what we were telling each other. In other words, well, I didn't make a profit this year, but I did some good networking. Well, networking is done. You can do a lot of networking online now, right? You can. And by the way, don't tell me you're all torn up about networking, and then I look at your social media feed, and you don't do any posting of other people's work, which is networking. You don't do any commenting other people's posts, which is networking. You can't tell me that you're all desperate to do networking when you're never networking the other 365 days of the year, right? So I had to look at that and say, yeah, you're not really networking, guy. You're an independent. You always will be. Okay. And by the way, if you're actually out there, picking up jobs, you're going home. I've got a good friend that not now when she goes to a convention, she's like a road warrior, like I used to be. And she comes home with projects. She comes home with assignments from the people that she stopped at. She comes home with contacts that she's going to be following up with throughout the year. Networking isn't just like a chatter thing with her. Okay, if you're doing that, I've got nothing but respect for you. Oh yeah, and Teddy, yeah, I'm going to give you a little tough love there because you just gave me a little Niagara Falls moment. I'm horrible on social media, but and if you had stopped there, I would have jumped on. But yes, I need to get better, and you can get better. This is very simple stuff here, Teddy. We talk about it on the ComicLab podcast all the time. Swig say why it's good. 4Cs to social media. And that thing that I just got done talking about today, using a scheduler to go through and schedule out. It's okay to admit that you're not good at it, but then you've got to say that second sentence, which is, and here's how I'm going to get better at it. because you just can't keep complaining about it. You can't keep complaining about the same thing. Right? My mom had a great phrase. She said, "Get out the cross. We need the wood." And you can't keep complaining about the same thing and and expecting us to keep listening to it, right? At some point, someone's going to call you on your BS. So yeah, you had the right idea. Not good at it, but here's my plan for getting better. Now you got my attention. That's exactly what I want to hear, because you know this is all stuff that you can learn. None of this stuff is. Listen. I got news for you. I'm not a particularly smart guy. I'm not a person with a particularly great memory, right? A guy that got to write things down. The reason I use the scheduler is because I forget for days at a time what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not a super smart guy, but I do real good on social media because I realized a long time ago this was going to be a big part of my success. And I could either be one of these guys that sneered and said, "Man, I don't like social media," or I could figure out what it took to do it effectively and do that thing. Well, even a guy that's not as smart as me could tell you which is the better choice between those two. And if I can do it, you can do it. Because I'm telling you, not a super smart guy here. If I was any smarter, I would have set up over there by the air conditioner. So listen, thank you so much for hanging out with me on another Friday. This has been great talking comics with you. If you have any thoughts beyond here, don't feel afraid to hit me up on Blue Sky or here in Substack Notes. Thank you for those hearts down there. Be sure to subscribe to the Webcomics Handbook. I'll be having a little bit more talk about using a scheduler with some visual aids. And if you want to book comics consultations so that you and I can sit down and talk about this stuff and how it directly applies to you and come up with some strategies for your specific situation, don't be afraid to jump over there to bradgeiger.substack.com. You'll see the hero post right there in the middle. In fact, if you don't know what I mean when I say hero post, I'll explain to you what a hero post is and why you need to have one on your Substack page. We did that too, Marguerite, didn't we? So, thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope to hear from you soon. Aside from that, have a fantastic week. Stay safe out there. People are somebody who's been on the interstate for 26 hours total over the last week. People get hot and they make bad choices behind the wheel. So keep an eye out for those guys and have a wonderful creative week. When we get to the end of next week, meet back here. Tell me about all the creative things you did, all of your triumphs, and a couple of your challenges, and we'll hash it all here out as we're talking comics.